Hey everyone, welcome back to Chat Like a Native. Today, we're doing something a little different.
Yeah, we're going deep on some grammar stuff, things that trip up even, people who are pretty good at English already.
Right, those intermediate learners who are like, okay, I get the basics, but there's still something missing. We're talking about those little grammar beliefs, those almost rules that people have strong opinions about.
Oh yeah, those things everyone's heard but maybe aren't always true. Like, can you end a sentence with a preposition? What's the deal with double negatives? We're going to break it all down.
Exactly. So if you're ready to feel more confident and clear in your English, stick around.
Let's do it.
Okay, let's start with a big one. The one everyone's heard, never end a sentence with a preposition.
Right. That's like grammar rule number one, supposedly.
But honestly, when I'm talking, it often feels totally natural to end a sentence that way. What's the deal?
Well, you're right. It can sound totally normal. And a lot of times, trying to avoid it makes your English sound kind of stiff and unnatural. Almost like you're trying too hard to be proper.
Yeah, like you're speaking a different language almost. So when did this idea even start?
It kind of goes back to, like, really old grammar books.
Yeah.
Based on Latin, where you couldn't end sentences with prepositions. But English isn't Latin.
Right. It has its own thing going on. So
Oh.
for our listeners, can you give some examples of how it actually works in natural English?
Of course. Think about a question like, who are you going with? Perfectly normal, right?
Yeah, totally. I say that all the time.
But someone really strict about that old rule would try to say, with whom are you going? Which, you could say it, but...
It sounds like something out of a history book.
Exactly. Another one, that's the person I was talking about. Way more natural than, about whom was I talking?
Right. Way more natural.
Yeah.
So what's the takeaway for our listeners who are trying to, really nail that natural English?
Be clear. That's the main thing. If ending a sentence with a preposition sounds good and people understand you, you're fine. Seriously.
Awesome. Okay, another one that always sounds a bit intimidating, split infinitives.
Yes. Split infinitives. Sounds very technical, doesn't it?
It does. So first off, what is it exactly?
It's when you put an adverb, a word that describes a verb, in the middle of an infinitive. An infinitive is like to go, to see, to understand, that kind of thing.
Okay, so the to and the verb, you stick something in between?
Yep, like to boldly go. The boldly splits the infinitive to go.
Okay, I see. And why are we told to avoid them?
Again, kind of a Latin hangover. In Latin, infinitives are one word, so you can't split them. Some people try to apply that to English, but it doesn't always work.
Because English likes to do its own thing.
It does. And honestly, split infinitives are often the most natural way to say something. Like, I want to really understand this. It sounds better than I really want to understand this sometimes.
It does flow better that way. Okay, so is this another one of those things where being super strict about the rule actually makes you sound less natural?
Absolutely. In casual conversation, or even a lot of writing, split infinitives are totally fine. Again, clarity is key. If it helps you get your meaning across, go for it.
Okay, good to know. Now, this one always causes a bit of confusion, double negatives. Learners are often told they're a huge mistake.
Yeah, they can be tricky. The thing is, in standard English, two negatives usually end up canceling each other out, and you end up with a positive meaning.
So, like, I don't know nothing actually kind of means I do know something.
Exactly. The logic can be a little mind-bending.
It can. So why do people use them at all? I definitely hear double negatives sometimes.
So there are a few reasons. In some regional dialects, double negatives are totally normal, and they're used for emphasis. Like, I don't want none of that means you really, really don't want it.
Makes sense. So it's okay in some places, but not in others. It all comes back to context, right?
Exactly. But for learners who are aiming for clear, standard English, it's usually best to stick with a single negative, just to avoid any potential confusion.
Okay, that makes sense. We've tackled some of those grammar myths. Now let's switch gears a bit. What are some of the real solid grammar rules that help you communicate clearly in English?
All right, let's start with one of the fundamentals, subject-verb agreement. This one's really important.
Yeah, it's all about making those subjects and verbs play nicely together, right?
Exactly. In a nutshell, if your subject is singular, the verb needs to be singular too. If the subject is plural, the verb needs to be plural. Sounds simple, but it's easy to slip up, especially in longer sentences.
Can you give us a quick example?
Sure. The cat runs fast. Singular cat, singular verb runs. But if we have more than one cat, it becomes the cats run fast. Plural cats, plural verb run.
And why is it so important to get this right?
Well, when the subject and verb don't agree, It just sounds off to a native speaker. It can also make it harder for people to understand what you're trying to say.
It's like a little hiccup in the sentence.
Right. It disrupts the flow. Okay, let's move on to another big one. Verb tenses.
Oh yeah, tenses can be a real headache for English learners.
They can be, but they're so important for making sure people understand when things happened. If you mix up your tenses, it can lead to all sorts of misunderstandings.
Okay, let's break down a couple of the trickier ones. Present simple versus present continuous. What's the difference?
So present simple, you use it for things that happen regularly, habits, routines, facts, things that are generally true, like I eat breakfast every day.
Okay, everyday stuff.
Right. Present continuous, on the other hand, is for things that are happening right now, at this very moment. I am eating breakfast right now.
Yeah.
It's all about the timing.
Got it. So present simple for the usual, present continuous for right now. What about past tenses? Those can be tricky too. Past simple versus present perfect, for example.
Ah, yes. A classic source of confusion.
Yeah.
So past simple is for completed actions in the past, usually at a specific time. I visited Paris last year. We know exactly when it happened.
Clear cut, done and dusted.
Yep. Present perfect, though, is a bit more slippery. It's for experiences that happened at some point in the past, but the exact time isn't important. Or maybe it's for something that started in the past and is still true now. Like, I have been to Paris. We don't know when, just that it happened.
So it's more about the experience itself, not the specific time.
Exactly.
Okay, tenses, those are important. What about articles? Those little words, A, N, N, N. I know this can be a real challenge, especially if your native language doesn't have them.
Oh, yeah. Articles can be tricky. They basically tell you whether you're talking about something specific or general.
Okay, so how does that work exactly?
Well, A and N are what we call indefinite articles. You use them when you're talking about any one of something, not a specific one, like, I saw a dog in the park. We don't know which dog, just any dog.
Could have been any dog.
Right, but the is the definite article. You use it when you're talking about a specific thing that you and the other person both know about. I saw the dog that lives next door. Now we're talking about a particular dog.
The one and only. Any tips for mastering articles, especially for learners who don't have them in their first language?
Honestly, the best thing is exposure. Listen to a lot of English, read a lot of English, pay attention to how native speakers use articles. It'll start to feel more natural over time.
Awesome. Okay, so we've talked about some key grammar rules. Now let's not forget the unsung hero of clear writing, punctuation.
Punctuation is so important. It might seem small, but it can completely change the meaning of what you're trying to say.
It's like the traffic signals of writing. Tell us a bit more about that.
Okay, so think about commas. A classic example is, let's eat grandma, versus let's eat grandma.
Yeah, those have very different vibes.
Very different. Commas can be life-saving. And then, of course, you have periods, which tell you when one thought ends and another begins. Question marks show that you're asking a question. Exclamation points add emphasis or excitement.
All these little marks doing a lot of heavy lifting.
They really do. Punctuation might not be glamorous, but it's crucial for clear communication.
Okay, we've busted some myths. We've looked at important rules. Let's go back to those myths for a second. What's another one that can hold learners back?
How about the idea that there's only one right way to speak or write English? That can be really limiting.
Yeah, because language always feels so strict, like you have to do it this way.
It can feel that way, but actually, language is constantly changing and evolving.
Yeah.
What was considered correct 50 years ago might sound super formal or even wrong today. Slang changes, everyday expressions change. It's all in flux.
So there's room for flexibility then.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's good to learn the standard forms, of course, but don't be afraid to explore the way language is used in different contexts.
Makes sense. Okay, another myth I've heard is that longer, more complicated sentences are always better.
Yeah, that one's not necessarily true. While complex sentences can be great for showing off your grammar skills, sometimes a simple, direct sentence is way more effective.
So it's not about showing off, it's about choosing the right tool for the job.
Exactly. Variety is good, but clarity is king.
Couldn't agree more. All right, one last myth to tackle. The belief that grammar rules are absolute and you should never, ever break them.
Yeah, that one can really stifle creativity and natural expression. Grammar rules are important, but they're more like guidelines than unbreakable laws.
So there's room for interpretation, for bending the rules sometimes.
Definitely. Once you have a good understanding of the rules, you can start to see when it might be okay to bend them. or even break them to achieve a certain effect or sound more natural in a specific situation.
Like those cool writers who break the rules on purpose and it just works.
Exactly. But
Yeah,
again, you need to know the rules first before you can break them effectively.
that makes sense. So, for our listeners who are really keen on improving their grammar, what are some practical things they can do?
So many things. Read, read, read. Read anything and everything you can get your hands on. That's the best way to see grammar in action.
It's like absorbing it through osmosis.
Exactly. Also, write every day. It doesn't have to be a novel, just a few sentences. Focus on using 1 or 2 grammar points correctly each time.
Building those good habits.
Yep. And listen to native speakers. Pay attention to how they structure their sentences, how they use grammar in real conversations.
Active listening, that's key.
It is. Don't be shy about asking for feedback on your writing either. Teachers, language exchange partners, friends, they can all help you spot mistakes and improve.
Those fresh eyes are so valuable.
They are. And keeping a little grammar journal where you write down mistakes you make and the corrections can be really helpful. Oh, and take advantage of all the amazing resources online. Grammar websites, apps, there's so much out there.
So much to explore. Now, we talked about context earlier, but I think it's worth emphasizing again. It's not just about memorizing grammar rules in isolation, is it?
Definitely not. Grammar rules are there to help you communicate clearly in specific situations. They're not just abstract ideas.
So you always need to keep in mind who you're talking to, what you want to say, and how your message will be understood.
Absolutely. Sometimes being a bit flexible with a rule is better than sticking to it rigidly if it makes your meaning clearer. It's all about effective communication.
Communication is key. And this brings up another important point, which is being flexible in your approach to language learning. It's not about being perfect from the start, right?
Nope. Language learning is a journey. Experiment, try new things, don't be afraid to make mistakes. Mistakes are how we learn, after all.
They're stepping stones.
Exactly. Analyze your mistakes, figure out why you made them, and learn from them. And remember, language is always changing, so be open to new trends and ways of using it.
Okay, last but not least, let's talk about grammar in the digital age. Texts, emails, social media, it all feels a lot more relaxed, right?
It does, and it's fine to be more informal in those contexts. But even then, clarity is still important.
So how do you strike that balance?
Think about your audience and the situation. A formal email to your boss will need different grammar than a casual text to a friend. It's always good to proofread before you hit send, especially for work stuff.
Always a good idea.
And even in casual writing, being consistent with your grammar can make a big difference in how clearly people understand you.
Okay, wow, we covered a lot of ground today.
We did.
Thanks for joining me for this deep dive into English grammar. I hope our chat, like a native listeners, found it helpful.
My pleasure. It was a fun one.
So just to recap, grammar is a tool, not a weapon. Use it to express yourself clearly and confidently. Practice, be open to learning, and don't be afraid to experiment.
Well said.
And here's a final thought for you. Think about how understanding these flexible grammar points, the ones that even native speakers debate, can actually help you sound more natural and confident in your English.
Food for thought.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Until next time.
See ya.